Hi, I'm back again and I'm recording for week number 10. We're getting close to the end of our first semester of New Testament Greek study, and I really hope that all of you will continue. We, in Greek 1, we basically introduce concepts of how the Greek language works. And we can't really get into the really interesting parts about the difference that it makes when we read the New Testament. So even though learning Greek is actually kind of like getting a color TV instead of a black and white TV, you see so much more. And it's so much more attractive, interesting, and sometimes also convicting because the Holy Spirit points out more things, but more things about Jesus and who he is, what he means to us, and also what he can do in and through us. So overall, the study of Greek is very encouraging, not only for you, but I trust also for those to whom the Lord will lead you to minister and to explain his word. You won't be able necessarily to be an expert. You may not make your own translation, although I hope some of you will. There are many languages, even in Pakistan, that still need the scriptures in a new translation. Some I don't think even have one of their own yet, of any kind. So that's a work that needs to be done. And you can ask at, for example, the Pakistan Bible Society and find out which languages are needed for the Gospel of Matthew and Gospel of John. Those are two of the more easily translated Gospels. And so if you learn this course well, and especially if you go on to your MPhil studies, I hope that many of you will, maybe God will lead you into that kind of work. In the meantime, you will be able, I think, to explain the New Testament better to yourself, find pearls of wisdom, and share these with others. So I really hope that all of you to whom God has given a call for this work will continue with Greek 2. Before we finish Greek 1, however, we have two more chapters, chapter 9 and chapter 10. Chapter 10 is really just some forms about a pronoun we need to learn. Chapter 9 is a little more complicated, and I think it's good for us to stop just a moment and look at English grammar and make sure that we all understand English grammar well before we continue on with chapter 9, because it gives us some new vocabulary words, but it does more than that. It also, it is building upon a knowledge of grammar that we all need to have. And I want to make sure that everyone understands the terms that we use. This will help you not only in Greek 1, but in all the other Greek courses and in any language course, I think, that you take from now on. So let's look at some terms in English grammar. Some of you may know these already. So maybe all of you know these already. And if so, please tell Masood or Ms. Zenaria, really this lesson wasn't anything new for me. That would be of help because I don't want to explain things that you already know. But I think that at least some will find this this presentation and this study interesting. Now, you should be able to see my screen, and I'm going to turn on my spotlight. There we are. And you should see English Introduction to English Grammar for Greek Students. I remember when I was taking my first Hebrew course, Old Testament Hebrew, many, many years ago. I don't want to say how long it's been. It's been a long time. But the instructor stopped in the middle of the course and had a long lesson on Introduction to English Grammar for Hebrew students. So I thought that having a little introduction to English grammar for Greek students at this point might be helpful for you. So we're going to look at just some grammatical terms that we use a lot or have been using, and make sure that we all understand them. So the first question, how many grammatical terms can you think of in English? And I think by now you probably will immediately think of verb, because we have really concentrated on verbs. Actually, probably it's correct to say the verb is the most important grammatical part of studying New Testament Greek, because the Greek verb contains so much information. But we also have nouns, the names of things. We have pronouns, which take the place of nouns for several different reasons. And we have the term subject. You remember the subject of a sentence. And we'll look at that in just a moment. We've had this term direct object. And I know that this has been a little difficult to understand for some students, and especially this one, the indirect object. What is that? But we have actually many more. If we take these 6 that come to mind, maybe more come to mind, we should add article. There's the indirect article in English and the direct article. We have 2 in English. I just need to mention that. Adjectives, or maybe you say adjective. I learned to pronounce it adjective, so that's the way I say it. But you can say it whatever way that you have learned. Adjectives or adjectives modify, we say modify nouns. They describe nouns. They give us additional information about nouns. We have adverbs, which give us more information about verbs. They add to the verb, so they're called adverbs. We have conjunctions, words that combine or do different things about that, similar things. We have prepositions. When we talk about verbs, we often talk about tense, present tense, past tense. In Greek, we usually call this aorist tense. And before you say, well, why don't we just call it past? Let me just say that the Greek aorist tense is not quite the same as the past tense in English. Past perfect and present perfect, those are 2 tenses we also have in English. We also have them in Greek. We learn them, we don't learn them until Greek 3 and 4. So you can be patient and thankful that we don't have those right now. We will have the future tense in Greek 4 as well. And we might mention the future perfect, but that's not really a tense that matters so much in Greek. What does matter is voice, and we will mention the active and the passive. And in Greek, we also will have something we call the middle voice. Mood, you may remember that we mentioned mood, but we don't have any other mood right now in Greek 1 except the indicative. And there will be others that we will have, especially in Greek 2, and we will add a few more in Greek 3 and 4. But for right now, the indicative mood is the main one. So let's look at, first of all, some grammatical forms, or perhaps better said, grammatical terms. They're like pieces of a puzzle. And we need to know, if you've ever put a puzzle together, you know that the puzzles have different shapes, and you have to find the puzzle piece that fits with the next puzzle piece. And really building a sentence is a lot of times a matter of finding which piece of the puzzle is here or belongs here. One very important piece of the puzzle of a Greek sentence is the verb. A word that expresses action, existence, or occurrence, according to the textbook. Dr. McIver on page 41. Actually, this is from the 5th edition, and you have the 6th edition, so I think it's on page 43. A word that expresses action, existence, or occurrence. For example, an action, peripato. This is a verb that we had in chapter 5, peripateo, but you notice that when you use it in a Greek sentence, it contracts. The epsilon drops or combines with omega to become peripato with the circumflex accent over it. I walk, or I am walking. The continuous present is one that I prefer to use. So peripato expresses an action. I am walking. Now, if I had this sentence, huper anthropos petraxo, which I don't find in the New Testament, it might mean something like Superman is flying. I made up this word huper anthropos because there is no such word in the Greek language. I think they would simply say Superman, like most European languages simply adopt the English term Superman, but they might say Petraxo. I don't know modern Greek. Petraxo is actually from the Greek Bible, from the Old Testament, from chapter 1 about God creating the birds that fly. So I got the verb petraxo from there, to fly. And you probably see I made a mistake here already. It's not petraxo, it has petraxe, Superman, third person singular. I just noticed I made this mistake. So change this to epsilon iota, third person singular. Superman is flying. This is an action. A verb expresses an action. It expresses existence, especially with the verb is, esteem, is. Something is. Describes existence or occurrence. And we have actually, if you remember, I think we started learning Greek, John 1:1-3 in Greek by memory, but I dropped this requirement because of COVID times and we have less things that we can do. So I'm not doing the memory work that we would normally do in I'm not doing the memory work that we would normally do in Greek 1. Normally we learn John 1:1-3 by memory. I think we studied John 1:1 in arche ein hologos kai hologos ein proston theon kai theos ein hologos. You hear the word ein 3 times, it means was or was being. In the past, was being, continuous. This describes existence. So a verb can be an action, can describe existence, or it can describe an occurrence or something happening. and that is in particular in verse 3 of John 1, panta di autou egeneto. This verb egeneto is in the past tense or the aorist tense in Greek, means all things happened, or all things came into being, or all things actually were created. But the verb itself normally means just happened. It happened, they came into being. So that's a verb in the Greek New Testament that expresses something that happens. So going back to our presentation again, and getting back my flashlight, my spotlight. Action, existence, occurrence. All these things the verb does. It actually does many more, but those are some of the main things. Verbs have mood, we already said, and the one that we are learning this semester is only the indicative. Next semester, we learn the subjunctive and the infinitive. And in Greek 3, we learn the participle. And in Greek 4, we learn the imperative commands. So we take our time learning these things. Right now, we will only learn the present tense. And in Greek 2, we begin the past tense, or what we call the aorist tense. And we will have voice. I'll describe in just a moment. The voice, the subject acts. Passive voice, the subject is acted upon. Notice that our boy here, we call him Charlie Brown in America. Charlie Brown is being carried. The action is happening to him. He's not doing anything except smiling. He is being carried. And the fact that he's being carried is a passive verb. Something is happening to him. He's being carried by the other children. And the other children tell us who is actually doing the action, but we call this a passive verb. Charlie Brown and Snoopy, his dog, Charlie Brown and Snoopy are being carried. That would be passive. And we will find that Greek also has a middle voice. Snoopy, by the way, is a very, very interesting dog. This is his house. He likes to sit on top of his house. And I'll talk about him in just a moment. And this middle voice that we have in Greek. Now, we have verbs and we have nouns. The name of something. Dr. McIver mentions it on page 50. I think in your textbook here, it was page 48 in the 5th edition, page 50 in the 6th edition. We have common nouns. You might be surprised that I put ha Christos as a common noun and he Adelphi, sister, also as a common noun. But you have to understand that Christos, which we think of as Jesus Christ, as a name, a proper name, is actually in the Old Testament, and especially Old Testament was in Hebrew, but it was also translated into Greek. And the Greek, Christos, means the anointed one, the one they were expecting, the Messiah who was to come to save them and to be the new king. And in that sense, ho Christos is actually a common noun. We expect a savior. We expect a king, a savior, the Christ. These are all common nouns. Proper nouns are the names of people, usually, or cities, or countries, or oceans, or seas. Call those proper nouns. Usually names of people. Jesus is a proper noun. The rule is if it can be pluralized, like theos, then it is not a proper noun. Now you might say, well, we could talk about Jesuses, because in Spanish, the name Jesus is used a lot. Many people are named Jesus in the Spanish language. Jesus, I think, is the way the Spaniards pronounce it. But generally, if the word, you don't talk about Peter's, you don't talk about John's, you don't talk about Epaphroditus's or Paul's, you talk about one particular Paul or one particular Peter or one particular John. So those are proper names if you can't make them plural usually. But a word like theos is actually not so much a proper name unless you use it as a noun, a name of God, and address him as God. In that case, if you address the only one God, then it is a proper name. But we can talk about gods. So in that sense, it is a common noun. We have abstract or generic nouns like love, joy, peace, and collective nouns like the people, the crowd. The singular, collective means the singular noun stands for a group. So the people is a group, but we can pluralize it. We can have the peoples, the crowds, achloi. So they can be pluralized, but they do express more than one. They express a group. Now, if you don't understand all that right now, it's not so important, but it's worth pointing out. Well, we have pronouns. Pronoun means before a noun, pro and noun, or representing a noun. We say I or he or she instead of naming the person or thing. And you remember that Greek verbs, there are 3 persons, singular and plural. So every kind of pronoun can have 6 forms. The 6 forms of the personal pronoun, we call it the personal pronoun, are I, we, you, he, she, it, and they. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So actually, this one can have the personal, can have 8 forms. And if we add the Old English thou and ye, which we don't use anymore, for the singular, we used to say thou and ye for the singular and plural. Now we just say you and you, which is very confusing because you don't know when you say you, do you mean you singular or do you mean you plural? Now, this is a good point to just reflect on the fact that the Greek language gives us both you singular and you plural, because sometimes Paul will say, for example, you are the temple of the Lord, talking about you as a Christian. The Holy Spirit lives in you, and he will use the singular. But usually he uses you plural, you all together, talking about the whole church is the temple of the Lord. And the Lord lives in all of us together. And that's a very important distinction. So we need to watch out in the New Testament where the you singular is used and where the you plural is used. So it's good when you translate to put by you plural, for example, a P in parentheses, meaning you plural, that I can see that you know that this form is plural. We have I, you singular, he, she, it, we, you, and they. Those are all pronouns, but you will also remember that the Greek verb contains that pronoun, so it contains that information. Now we're going back to our presentation. Verb, noun, pronoun. Remember, the Greek verb contains the pronoun. It does not have to be added. But if it is usually for the sake of emphasis. We'll talk about that later. Now, there are many kinds of pronouns, and we're going to learn the personal pronoun, the third person personal pronoun in chapter 10. So far, we have learned I and we, and this is ego and hemes. Especially in Greek 2, we learn hemes, and in Greek, in chapter 10, we'll learn he, she, and it, because he, she, and it can be added to a sentence for the sake of emphasis, just like I and we. We also will have the demonstrative pronoun, the interrogative pronoun, which is a question. This is a word that just says question. Who, which, what, with a question mark. Those are pronouns that ask questions. And we'll have other kinds of pronouns. We don't need to know all of those right now. Now, another grammatical term we use is article. The article points out something. Actually, it can turn almost any kind of grammatical form in Greek into a noun. Loving, for example, is a verb form, loving. But if I add the article, the one loving, then I've made the verb form loving into a noun, or we also call it a substantive because it has substance. And what does that is the article. Another thing that we need to remember is that there are two articles in English. Before I leave this, a, the indefinite article, a or an, and the definite article. Conjunctions. So we have verbs, nouns, pronouns, adjectives, adverbs, conjunctions. Conjunctions join sentences together, and, or but, or rather. This one is one that just joins, and here there's a contrast. I like toast, but my sister likes chapati, and or but. I like to read, but my sister rather likes to jump on the trampoline or jump on the bed. Something her parents probably don't like her to do. But when we have two sentences or like that, they can be joined like with and or with but or rather. Sometimes a phrase is dependent, we say. That is, it cannot stand by itself. And that would be here, John is not going to school because he is sick. This phrase really can't stand by itself. He is sick. In a sense, it is a sentence. But since we don't know who it describes, who it's talking about, it's really a dependent, we say, dependent on this one. John is not going to school. We could put a period here and we would have a complete sentence. But we have because, which is also a conjunction. And that makes this phrase dependent on this. John is not going to school because he is sick. And we say this phrase, because he is sick, is a dependent phrase or a dependent clause. It's dependent on the main clause. John is not going to school, and then add some information because he is sick. Now we have adjectives or adjectives, as you say. They qualify or they describe a noun. Adjectives can also be in what's called the predicate position. Normally, we would say, for example, the good man, but the predicate position or the predicate usage would be to say the man is good. We supply the verb is, and we say the man is good. This is still an adjective, but it's being used in the predicate position, or that's the predicate usage. Predicate is a word that simply means to predicate something or to describe something. And it has to have a verb like is or was. In John 1:1, it says the word was God. God is defining something about the word. It is giving us information about the word, describing the word. The word was being always, from all eternity, God. Blessed be the Lord is also the predicate position. The Lord be blessed. Blessed is describing the Lord. It's an adjective describing the Lord himself. Then we have adverbs. They add to the verb in some way. If I say the lady is good, then good is an adjective describing the lady. The lady is good. But if I say the lady did a job well, then well is an adverb because it qualifies or it gives more information about did. It describes the verb instead of the lady. Something she did well. She may not be good. She could be a bad lady, but she did a job well. So again, well describes the verb, not the lady. So remember that we distinguish between adverbs and adjectives. Adverbs describe verbs. Adjectives describe nouns. Got that? Again, adjectives describe nouns. The lady is good, or the good lady. Either one, it's an adjective. The good lady is the usual way we use adjectives. The bad boy. The lady is good is what we call in the predicate position that uses a verb like is or was. But the lady did well. She ran well. She typed well. She wrote well. The well describes how she did, how she typed, how she ran, depending on what this verb is. Did or run or type or whatever the verb is, the well describes it. It could be a good lady, could be a bad lady, could be a fat lady, could be a thin lady. That would be an adjective, but well describes the verb. Now, again, we have two different articles in English. We've already mentioned that. I'm going to stop the presentation here because I think this additional information is not needed, I'm going to continue the presentation here. I hope you're keeping up with me so far. I'm going to send you the presentation, the complete presentation, or I'm going to attach it as a PDF. I'm going to ask you to do the last slide. I'm going to share with you how to do that last slide now. So let me share that screen with you again. And we're going to mention prepositions. One thing I forgot. Prepositions add information to a sentence. They're kind of like adverbs in that they often tell how or when or where, especially in Greek, but they're usually related to a noun as well, especially with the genitive case. And I'll explain what that means in just a moment. But the main thing we need to know right now is that the preposition has a case which belongs with it. And some prepositions can have more than one case belonging to it. We have learned the preposition in. In takes only the dative case, as in to, oiko, in the house. While the preposition epi can take the genitive case, upon, with the genitive case, epi, to, oiku, or the dative case, near the house, epi, to, oiko, as here, which would mean with epi, near the house, or it can have the accusative case, epi, ton, oikon, against the house. We don't meet that preposition until chapter 10, but giving you that information now kind of gives you forewarning of what's to come. All of these things, verbs, nouns, pronouns, adjectives, adverbs, conjunctions, articles, and prepositions, we need to understand what they are. They are pieces in the puzzles of Greek sentences. But now the question is, how do these pieces fit together? It isn't enough to have building blocks. We have to do something with these blocks. Notice here that they are taking those pieces of the puzzle and they are making a bridge across. So that's kind of what we are doing when we are learning Greek grammar. We are taking these pieces like nouns and verbs and prepositions and conjunctions, and we are understanding what they are, but also we are doing something with them. So we make what we call grammatical constructions. We don't just take the puzzle piece by themselves, we put the puzzle pieces together in the right way. And we have to put them together in the right way. As you see here, the red goes with the blue, with the yellow and the green. So putting together these means that most sentences will have a subject. The subject can be a noun. It can be a phrase. It can be a pronoun. Whatever it is, a noun or a phrase or a pronoun, it tells us who is doing the action or what it is that's being described. In the case, for example, of an adjective describes the subject. Who is doing the action? You say, how can a phrase be a subject? Well, for example, the man who is hitting the ball is actually the subject of the sentence. The man who is hitting the ball is a phrase. It's also a subject. The man who is hitting the ball is fat. Notice that I just made an adjective that describes the man who is hitting the ball, which is actually a phrase. A whole phrase, which is the subject. I could just say the man hitting the ball is fat. In that case, only a noun, the man. For example, Yunus Khan is batting. Yunus Khan is the subject. Yunus Khan is a noun, a proper noun, a name of someone, a batter, a famous cricket player, Yunus Khan. The subject, the action could be done to the subject. Yunus Khan was hit by the ball because the bowler threw a wild pitch. In that case, we call this a passive voice of the verb because it doesn't describe what Yunus Khan did. It describes what happened to Yunus Khan. Yunus Khan is the subject. A sentence as a subject, that's one piece, one puzzle piece. A sentence as a verb. And actually, we often say it's the first thing we should look for in a Greek sentence because it may contain the subject. Since the verb contains a pronoun, the verb pronoun might be the subject. Only verbs that have third person singular or plural, he, she, it, or they, may have a different subject. A verb can have tense, mood, voice, and aspect. Aspect, am I in the middle of something happening? Progressive, he is hitting, or I am hitting, or am I looking at something from the outside? He hits, or he was hit, or he hit, or he fell down. I'm looking from the action from the outside, describing what happened. So the aspect is a little difficult to understand, and we really don't get into it until we get to Greek 3 and 4, but it simply is describing, am I in the middle of the action or am I looking at it from the outside? Those are the two main aspects that we have, especially in the Greek language. And they become very important. Now, most sentences have a direct object, and this is one that has caused a lot of trouble for many students. But it's the object that the action acts upon. Yunus Khan bats the ball. The ball here is a noun, right? But it's being used as a direct object. Yunus Khan is the subject. Bats is the verb. The ball is the direct object. So a noun can be a subject. A noun can also be a direct object. We have a term for this. We call it a transitive verb, but you don't need to think of that right now. Some verbs are intransitive. That means they cannot take a direct object, but we'll talk about that later on. Sometimes we have an indirect object, especially with verbs of telling or saying. There's someone to whom the telling happens. John tells a story. John, the subject. Story, the direct object. Tells, the verb. Okay. We know who the subject is. We know who's doing the action. We know what the action is. That's the verb. And we know the direct object, story. Now, there could be an indirect object. If John tells his son Paul a story is still the direct object, but Paul is what we call the indirect object. John tells his son Paul a story. Paul is the indirect object. Story is the direct object. Paul is the indirect object. It's important to understand this, especially with verbs of speaking or saying or telling or yelling or asking. To whom? John tells the direct object is not enough because we also have an indirect object that tells us to whom the action, the telling, the speaking was said. Often the indirect object is replaced in English or Greek by a prepositional phrase. John told the story to Paul. To Paul is a prepositional phrase, to. Again, we have actually the same information. He told the story to Paul, but instead of using an indirect object, John tells Paul a story, or John tells Paul the story. We used the prepositional phrase to Paul. John told the story to Paul. So we don't have an indirect object here. We have Paul as the object, we say, of a preposition. Again, prepositions add information to the sentence and usually answer some kind of question like, whose ball is this? It is the ball of John, John's ball. It answers the question, whose ball? Where is it? Answers the question. It is in the house. The ball is in the house. It crashed through the window and it landed in the house. So where is it? In the house. Now, lastly, I want to do just, I know we have had a long session here on English grammar, but it's important to me that you understand. So I hope that you have watched this. It may be best to watch this in 3 different sessions or split it into 2 parts. Stop here and take a break, come back to it later, but finish it by doing these exercises. And the exercises we're going to do are, first of all, underline the pronouns. Underline the pronouns and underline the prepositions. So if, for example, I give you some sentences and ask you to underline the pronouns, it would look like this. Whoops. I made a mistake. I didn't underline them, but they're in red, so you can underline them. Andrew is in the house with his brother, John. His is actually a pronoun. It's a possessive pronoun, his brother, but it is a pronoun. He, that is John, is hitting his brother. This is not good for his brother. He is hurt. Now, important thing about pronouns is in English that they come close to the noun that they represent. It is not good for his brother, he. He is hurt. Now, suppose I meant that Andrew was hurt, then it would be confusing because when I read this in English, this is not good for his brother, he is hurt. The context, the fact that John hits his brother, tells me that probably his brother is hurt, but also the fact that he is next to brother is close. Then we call this the antecedent. You don't need to remember that term, but you just need to remember that when we write English, we need to put the pronoun close to the noun that it represents. His brother, he. This won't be so important in Greek because in Greek, the endings will tell us which word that the pronoun goes with. But right now, we just need to remember it can be confusing if we don't put the pronoun close to the noun. His brother, he. Now, the other thing I want us to notice are prepositions, and here I did underline them. Jane is watching television where? In her room. Her room is very small, but it is nice. It is across from her brother's room. The friend of Jane, Janice, is visiting her. She is nice. Notice here we have 3 prepositions. Well, technically 4, but these 2 go together. 1, in, is a preposition. In her room. Across from her brother's room. They have a nice house, and each one has a room, I guess. And there's a 3rd preposition, of. Now, in Greek, in would be en. This is preposition we know. In to mone. Sorry, this is a mistake. This should be te, not to. In te, with the iota subscript, mone. Mone is the Greek word for room. In my Father's house are many rooms. Jesus tells us in John chapter 14 and verse 2. Don't let your hearts be troubled. In my Father's house are many rooms. And he uses this word. Old translations say mansions, but that's misleading. It isn't a mansion, it's a room. So in te, not to, in te mone, in the room. Across from in Greek would actually be the preposition para, which we have not learned yet, but we will later in Greek too, with the dative case. Para to oiko, across from the house or beside the house. And of in Greek is expressed by using the genitive case. If you remember, the house of David equals David's house. Or I just need to move something. Oikos to David, the house of David. We use the article with proper names like David in Greek. So it's not just David, it's oikos to David. And the article is very helpful because it tells us that David is in the genitive case. It's David's house. The house of David or David's house. So of is a preposition, but in Greek, we just need the genitive case to express it. So instead of a preposition, usually we just have the genitive case. Oikos to David. So this is the last slide and the last part, you'll be glad to know, of our preposition. And these are things that you need to learn. You don't need to learn all the details, but you do need to understand what is a noun, what is a verb, what is an adjective, what is an adverb, what is a preposition. And in chapter 9, we will look at especially at voice. What is active voice? John hits, or Eunice Khan hits the ball. The verb, we say, is in the active voice. Passive voice, John was hit by the ball. So we will talk about voice. So you need to know these pieces of the puzzle, but also a little bit about how they are put together. Subject, object, direct object, sometimes the indirect object, prepositional phrases, in the house, by the river, across from the room, by the room. with the boy. These are all prepositional phrases. And prepositions are not so easy, but very important. They provide additional information that we need. So understand the puzzle pieces of English grammar and understand how these puzzle pieces are put together, how sentences are built using the puzzle pieces. A noun used as a subject. A verb is added to describe the action that the subject is doing. The direct object, what the subject is doing something, and usually there's a direct object. And the Greek sentence takes nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs and takes all these puzzle pieces and puts them together to make a sentence. So can you describe a noun? Can you describe what a verb is? Do you know what an adverb is? Do you know what an adjective is? And do you know how a direct object is part of a sentence? How a noun can be used as a direct object, or how a noun can be used as a subject? If you don't, go back and study this presentation. And you can look up also some of these words like on Wikipedia on your phones. And but just make sure that you understand the basic terms of English grammar, because it's important for us in learning Greek grammar. So I hope this has been helpful. If you still have questions, ask Masood or Ms. Zenaria to help you understand. Make sure that you understand the basic building blocks, the basic puzzle pieces of English grammar.